The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Students often mistake these two key ideas. They are very closely linked, but it only demonstrates a weaker understanding if you confuse them. The Truman Doctrine was a declaration by the incumbent American president that it would support any country financially that was fighting communism. The Marshall Plan, named for the Secretary of State General George Marshall, was the actual plan to distribute the money to countries whose application was successful. It was seen by Stalin as an attempt to impose capitalist ideas on European countries. This can therefore be viewed as another milestone in the deterioration of relations between the superpowers. In 1947, Britain, on the verge of bankruptcy, sent an urgent message to America stating it could no longer afford to support anti-communist forces fighting in the Greek Civil War. If America did not intervene, Greece would fall to communism. Additionally, countries such as France and Italy had large and powerful communist parties that appeared to be threatening to take control. The Truman Doctrine and following Marshall Plan not only pumped billions of dollars into European and Middle Eastern economies, but also gave them purchasing power to buy American goods, which further helped boost American business. Countries such as Czechoslovakia and Poland were keen to apply for Marshall aid as well, but were forbidden by Stalin. In response to the Marshall Plan, Stalin set up Coninform in 1947 to encourage links between different communist countries, and Comecon to help encourage trade. Neither of these were very successful, as none of the communist countries had enough money to support themselves, let alone each other. Don't worry too much about remembering these names or what they stand for, simply that they didn't work, and that they helped deepen the already gaping divide between the East and the West. One of the last significant milestones on the path to the Cold War was Stalin's blockade of West Berlin. At Yalta, it had been agreed that post-war Germany would be divided into 4 zones of occupation, each administered by a power: Britain, France, America, and Russia. However, as time passed and distrust grew, these temporary divisions took on a feel of permanency. A key reason for this was the disagreement as to what should be done with Germany. Being the cause of 2 invasions in the last 30 years, Stalin was keen to see the power and strength of Germany broken for good. In contrast, the Western Allies were keen to restore Germany's economy to support a more stable Europe. Thus nothing unanimous was agreed upon long term about the future of Germany. Instead, each side took steps to ensure that what they wanted to happen did so in their area of influence. Thus the Western Allies zones were united, first as Bizonia, then later when the French joined as Trizonia. Additionally, a separate currency, the Deutschmark, was introduced. Trizonia was also included in the Marshall Plan. Stalin was worried by the idea of a successful anti-communist government in the west of Germany. As a protest against the currency reforms and moves towards a divided Germany, Stalin decided to enforce a blockade on West Berlin. Berlin, like Germany as a whole, had been divided into 4 zones of occupation after the war, but it was deep within Soviet-controlled territory. It had tremendous significance as the heart of the Nazi machine in World War II, and now, from the Allies' perspective, as an oasis of capitalism in a dour sea of communism that could act as a showpiece of the wonders and allures of the Western world. As Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov aptly stated, "What happens to Berlin happens to Germany. What happens to Germany happens to Europe." What he meant was Berlin was of fundamental importance in deciding the future of the continent. America and Britain were taken by surprise at the start of the blockade. They were not sure how to respond. If supplies could not be gotten through to the people of West Berlin, then those 2 million people would starve. But to invade Soviet-controlled territory would plunge the world into another war. An airlift was decided upon. From June 1948, 5,000 tons of essential supplies were flown to Berlin every day along pre-existing air corridors. The task was monumental. Planes were landing once every 90 seconds at peak times, and unavoidable accidents caused the deaths of 79 American, British, and German personnel. Additionally, pilots had to endure intimidating flybys from Soviet fighter jets, a tactic known as saber rattling. However, by May 1949, Stalin was forced to give up his blockade in the face of international condemnation. The Berlin blockade, not to be confused with the Iron Curtain speech by Churchill in 1946 or the creation of the Berlin Wall in 1961, had numerous consequences that further divided Europe and fueled the start of the Cold War. By 1949, Russia, despite American estimates that it would take at least 20 years, had developed their own nuclear weapons, and with hostilities so high, began an arms race with America, stockpiling enormous amounts of nuclear weapons over the next few decades. The most significant consequence of the Berlin blockade was the final confirmation of a divide in Europe and the world between the two superpowers through the creation of military alliances. First, NATO was founded in 1949. It was a military alliance of Western powers headed by the USA that was designed for mutual protection from invasion. This, however, was seen as an aggressive move that threatened the security of the USSR, and in response, the Soviets created their own military alliance of communist states known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The Cold War had very much begun.